You shouldn't have done that. Monica's voice was calm, but it carried a weight that echoed down the hallway. She stood at the entrance of the sleek, modern office, her hands clasped in front of her, eyes unwavering. Patrick Anderson, the CEO of one of the most powerful corporations in the country, stared at her, stunned. His brow furrowed, his usual arrogance faltering for the first time in years. "Excuse me," he said, his tone dripping with disbelief. Monica had just walked into his private meeting, ignored the security, and stood her ground when everyone else would have backed down. She was just a cleaning woman. Or so they thought. Patrick looked around the room at the executives who were watching the scene unfold with a mix of confusion and amusement. He didn't care. He'd seen this before. He'd seen people try to stand up to him, try to outsmart him, and fail. But Monica wasn't like the others. Monica was different. Patrick's eyes scanned her, the woman who was barely over 5 feet tall, her uniform pristine but unremarkable. Her shoes were scuffed from months of cleaning. She was nothing but a mirror made to the likes of him. Or so he thought. But as she spoke, something in her voice made him hesitate. "I've been watching you," she continued, her words clear and deliberate. "And I'm not sure you understand what you're about to do." Patrick's chest tightened, his heart suddenly racing for reasons he couldn't quite explain. He had spent years building his empire, carefully crafting his reputation, but Monica's presence in this room, in his world, was an unsettling disruption. "What are you talking about?" he scoffed, standing up, trying to regain some semblance of control. "You don't belong here. You don't understand this business. Now leave." His words were sharp, but they didn't have the same bite they once did. Monica remained unfazed, her eyes fixed on him. She took a step forward. "You're about to make a deal that will ruin everything you've worked for." The silence in the room was deafening. Patrick looked at her, his mind racing. He was the one in charge. He was the one who dictated the rules. But in that moment, with Monica standing there, unmoving, something shifted in him. "What are you going to do?" Patrick sneered. Monica didn't answer immediately. She simply walked over to the conference table and tapped on the contract that was spread out in front of him. "This clause," she said, "it flips the liability. If you sign this, you're giving up everything." Patrick's eyes narrowed. He was used to being in control, used to making decisions that others couldn't even comprehend. But this was different. Monica wasn't afraid. She wasn't backing down. She was exposing something he had missed, something he should have seen. A tiny crack in his perfect world. The room was still, everyone's eyes now on him. Monica's gaze never wavered. She knew. She had seen the mistake. And Patrick? He was trapped. He had to admit it. The woman who had been nothing but a cleaner, a servant, had just saved him from making a catastrophic mistake. "You're right," he muttered, his voice barely audible, as if the words physically pained him to say. "I missed it. I should have seen this." Monica didn't smile. She didn't boast. She didn't need to. Her actions spoke louder than words ever could. She simply turned and walked out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. The next morning, Monica arrived at the office as usual, her uniform crisp and neat, a stark contrast to the high-end suits that filled the building. She wasn't looking forward to her shift. The energy in the building had shifted overnight. After the previous day's encounter with Patrick, whispers filled the halls. She could feel the weight of people's eyes on her as she walked past the gleaming glass doors of the executive offices. She kept her head down, just like she always had, but something inside her was different. It was the way people looked at her now, the way they paused when she walked by. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just the cleaning lady. Monica entered the service elevator, pressing the button for the top floor where she usually worked. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, and she took a deep breath. The tension from yesterday still lingered in the air, and she knew it wouldn't be long before Patrick came to speak with her. As the elevator ascended, she couldn't help but wonder how it would play out. Would he apologize? Would he thank her? Or would he simply pretend nothing had happened? When the doors opened, she stepped out into the sterile hallway that led to the executive offices. The scent of fresh coffee and polished wood greeted her, the same as always. But today something felt off. She had already cleaned this floor several times before, but today, every corner felt different. She wasn't just doing her job, she was now part of a bigger story. She approached the main conference room, the one where Patrick had sat just hours ago, surrounded by his high-powered team. She paused outside the door, hearing muffled voices inside. As she stood there, Monica reflected on what had happened. She had walked into that meeting, a room full of some of the most powerful people in the company, and she had made them listen. She had done something that none of them had expected. She had shown them that her worth was more than just her job title. It was something that had always been true, but it had never been acknowledged. Monica stood up straighter. Today was different. Patrick wasn't going to let her go unnoticed. As she began to push the door open, she saw Patrick standing by the window, speaking with a colleague. His back was to her, but Monica could see his posture. He looked different, less confident, less sure of himself. His voice was lower than usual as he spoke to the man beside him. She cleared her throat, and Patrick turned, his eyes widening when he saw her. "Monica," he said, his voice more cautious than before. He took a step toward her, an almost hesitant movement. "Can we talk?" Monica nodded. "Sure, Mr. Anderson." He glanced over his shoulder at the others in the room, who were now watching him closely. He motioned for her to follow him into a quieter corner. Monica didn't hesitate. She followed him, her footsteps steady, her head held high. "I wanted to thank you," Patrick said, once they were out of earshot. His tone was different now, softer. "You were right. About the contract." Monica didn't say anything. She simply nodded. Patrick looked at her with a mix of respect and curiosity. "I've been in this business a long time, and I thought I knew it all. But you—" He stopped himself, as if searching for the right words. "You saw something I missed." Monica remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I'm sorry for the way I treated you before," he added, his voice quieter now. "I underestimated you. I thought you were just a maid. But you're much more than that." Monica felt a strange mix of emotions. There was satisfaction, yes, but there was also something else. A quiet recognition. She had done what no one had expected, but the apology didn't change the fact that she was still the same person. She was still the woman who cleaned the floors, who served the coffee, who picked up the trash. But now, she was also the one who had saved their company. "I don't need your apology, Patrick," she said, her voice steady. "I just want to do my job. That's all." Patrick looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "Of course. But if you ever want to do more than clean floors, if you want a real job here," he trailed off, leaving the offer hanging in the air. Monica could feel the weight of his words. For a moment, she thought about it. About the offer. About what it would mean. But she knew. She knew that no matter how far she rose, no matter how much respect she earned, she would always be more than just the job she did. And that was enough. Days passed, and Monica's life continued on the same routine. She woke up early, put on her uniform, and made her way to the office. But today, something felt different. Patrick had spoken to her, acknowledged her presence, and for the first time, she felt seen. She hadn't expected an apology, nor had she wanted one. What mattered now was the unspoken understanding between them. The respect was there, and that was enough. As she moved through the halls, she noticed the subtle change in how the staff treated her. They no longer looked past her. She wasn't just a cleaner anymore. The employees who had once avoided her gaze now gave her brief nods of acknowledgement. Even the senior staff, who used to ignore her entirely, now seemed to notice when she walked by. She wasn't sure what had changed in them, but she could feel it. The whispers had died down, replaced by an undercurrent of curiosity. They were starting to realize that she wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was someone with a story, someone who mattered. That morning, as she stepped into the service elevator, she caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection of the polished metal. For a moment, she stared at her own image, seeing the tiredness in her eyes, the way her uniform clung to her form. But she didn't feel like the same person. She had made a mark. She had stood up, spoken out, and in doing so, she had shifted the power dynamic in this building, even if only a little. As the elevator reached her floor, she took a deep breath. The air smelled the same, clean and sterile, as always, but today, it felt like it carried a new possibility. She walked past the usual clusters of workers, nodding to a few familiar faces. She had her work to do, but now there was a quiet sense of pride in her every step. When she reached the conference room, the door was slightly ajar. Inside, she could hear Patrick's voice, louder than usual, as he spoke with his team. She didn't plan to interrupt, but as she stood there, she felt a pull. Patrick was standing at the head of the table, his back to her. He was discussing the upcoming projects, his usual confidence radiating from him. But something had shifted in him, something Monica could sense from the hallway. He He was no longer the man who had dismissed her with a sneer. There was something more. He had been humbled. Monica knocked lightly on the doorframe, and Patrick turned. The room went silent as all eyes turned toward her. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. "Monica," Patrick said, his voice steady but with a touch of something else, something like respect. "I need to speak with you." Monica stepped into the room, her shoes clicking softly on the polished floor. The executives in the room watched her, their expressions unreadable. Monica didn't feel nervous. She had walked this path before, but today, it was different. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice calm, her eyes meeting Patrick's. He hesitated for a moment, looking at the team around him. Then he spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his tone more thoughtful than before. "About the contract. And I've realized that I've been looking at things all wrong. I underestimated you, Monica. You see things differently than I do. And that's something I need." Monica didn't say anything, just let the words hang in the air. She had expected a conversation, but not this. Not the apology, not the acknowledgement. It was unexpected. "I don't need you to apologize, Patrick," she replied, her voice steady. "I just need to do my job. I'm not here to change the world. I'm here to do my part." Patrick nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "And you're doing it well. In fact, I want to offer you a position. A real position. Something that fits your talents." Monica's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected that. Not from him, not from anyone. She had always been invisible, always been the one who cleaned the floors and emptied the trash. But now, she was being offered something more. "I appreciate the offer," Monica said, her voice quiet, "but I'm good where I am. I don't need a title or a position. I just need respect. And I think we've got that now." Patrick didn't argue. He simply nodded. The tension in the room had melted away, replaced by a mutual understanding. Patrick turned to the others, signaling that the meeting was over. Monica turned to leave, but before she stepped out the door, she paused. "Thank you," she said, looking back at him, "for seeing me." Monica's routine remained unchanged for the most part, but there was a subtle difference now. She continued to clean the floors, empty the trash, and do her job, but every now and then, she caught herself glancing at the executives as they passed by. They didn't just ignore her anymore. They nodded, smiled, and some even made small talk. It was strange, but in a way, it was reassuring. The invisible barrier that had once separated her from the rest of the building had begun to fade. As she walked through the halls, she couldn't help but notice the way people were starting to treat her differently. She wasn't just the woman who cleaned the floors anymore. She was someone with a story, someone with knowledge, someone who had seen things the way they had never seen them before. Monica wasn't looking for praise, nor was she expecting anyone to treat her as if she were an equal. She knew her place. She always had. But the change in the air was undeniable. It was the way people acknowledged her, the way they began to see her not just for the job she did, but for who she was. One afternoon, as Monica was cleaning the conference room, Patrick approached her again. He was holding a coffee cup in his hand, his usual air of authority softened by something else. He stopped just short of her, a hesitant look crossing his face. "Monica," he said, his voice gentler than usual. She looked up from her work, her heart skipping a beat. "Yes, Mr. Anderson. I wanted to apologize again for how I treated you before," he said, pausing to find the right words. "I wasn't fair to you. I didn't see you for who you really are. I was wrong." Monica didn't say anything at first. She just nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. Patrick had already said something similar before, but this time, there was something more genuine in his voice. Something that made her believe he truly understood. "You didn't need to apologize," Monica said quietly. "I'm just doing my job. I've always done my job." Patrick hesitated before speaking again. "You've done more than that, Monica. You've helped me see things differently. You've helped me see how much I've taken for granted. I can't just ignore that." Monica felt her chest tighten, but she kept her composure. She wasn't looking for anything from him. She wasn't looking for his praise or his acknowledgement. She had done what needed to be done, and that was enough for her. "I don't need anything, Patrick," she said softly. "I'm not here for accolades. I'm here to do what's right." Patrick studied her for a moment, as if trying to read her. Then he nodded slowly. "You're right," he said, "and I'll never forget it." The two stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the office around them. Monica could feel the weight of the change in the air. The dynamics had shifted, and she knew that things would never be the same again. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She wasn't just the invisible worker who cleaned the floors and took out the trash. She was someone with a voice, someone with value, someone who had changed the course of things without even realizing it. As Monica finished her shift that day, she walked out of the building with a sense of quiet satisfaction. It wasn't a victory in the traditional sense. She hadn't won a battle or gained a position of power, but she had done something far more important. She had gained the respect she deserved. And that, in the end, was all that truly mattered. The days that followed felt like a blur. Monica continued with her work, the routine of cleaning the office floors and making sure everything was in order, but something had changed. It wasn't just the way people looked at her now, but how she felt about herself. Every step she took through the building was different. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just a worker who was seen as less than. People acknowledged her now, whether it was a polite nod, a brief conversation in the hallway, or a quiet recognition of her presence. It was a subtle shift, but it mattered. What surprised Monica the most was how she started feeling about her place in the company. There had been a time when she would have never dared to dream of being seen as more than just a cleaner. But now, every time she passed one of the executive offices, or when she entered a meeting room, she felt different. She felt like she belonged, like her worth wasn't just tied to her uniform. It was a strange feeling, one she hadn't experienced in years. One afternoon, as Monica was finishing her shift, she received an unexpected invitation to meet with Patrick. She had been cleaning the lounge area when one of the staff handed her a note. It was short and simple. "Monica, can you come to my office after your shift? I need to speak with you." Patrick. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected this. It had been a few days since their last conversation, and she wasn't sure what this new meeting was about. She had done her job, and she didn't think she had done anything wrong. But still, a sense of curiosity tugged at her as she made her way to Patrick's office. When she arrived, Patrick was standing by the window, looking out at the city below. The office was quiet, the only sound being the hum of the air conditioning and the distant noise of traffic. He turned when he heard her knock. "Monica," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Please, come in." She stepped inside, unsure of what to expect. Patrick gestured for her to sit in the chair across from him. As she took a seat, he leaned against the desk, his arms crossed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Monica waited, her hands folded in her lap. "I've been thinking a lot about you," Patrick said after a long pause. "About your offer. And I've realized that I made a mistake in how I approached you. I didn't see your potential before, but now I do. And I want to change that." Monica raised an eyebrow, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked. Patrick uncrossed his arms and stepped closer, his eyes meeting hers. "I want you to work for me. Not as a cleaner, but as something more. I want to offer you a real position here. A position that suits your talents." Monica blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "A position," she repeated. "But I'm just a cleaner. That's all I've ever been." Patrick shook his head. "You're more than that, Monica. I can see that now. You have a mind for business, for strategy. You saw something that none of us did. You deserve more than to just be the person who cleans the floors." Monica was silent for a moment, processing his words. She had always known she was capable of more, but this was beyond anything she had ever expected. "I don't know what to say," she admitted quietly. Patrick smiled slightly. "You don't have to say anything right now. Just think about it. I want you to know that the door is open for you, if you want to take that step." Monica felt a mixture of emotions flooding through her. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to be invisible anymore. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice steady. Patrick nodded, his smile widening. "You've earned this, Monica. Just know that." As she left his office, the weight of the conversation settled over her. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had control over it. She wasn't just a maid. She wasn't just a worker. She was someone who had value, someone who had been seen. And that was everything. Monica sat at her desk in the small office space. She had been given the soft hum of the air conditioning in the background. It was only her second week in this new role, and yet, it felt like a lifetime had passed. The change in her life was so significant, so swift, that sometimes she had to remind herself it was real. The same office that once made her feel small now felt like a space she belonged in. It wasn't much, a desk, a chair, a computer screen, but it was hers, and it meant something more than just a job. She wasn't cleaning floors anymore. She wasn't just filling time. She was working, and she was working for herself, not for someone who overlooked her or dismissed her. Patrick had been true to his word. Her new role wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful. She was working in the administrative department now, handling scheduling and correspondence for upper management. It wasn't a top-level position, but it was a step, and that was all she needed. The hardest part wasn't the work. It was adjusting to the way people treated her now. It wasn't that they were rude or dismissive. On the contrary, they were polite, even friendly. But it was the subtle shift in how she was seen, how they looked at her, as if she had suddenly become something different. She had never been treated like this before, and it made her feel both grateful and uneasy. She didn't want to be treated differently. She wanted to be respected for who she was, not just because she had been given a chance. There were days when the weight of it all felt heavy. Monica wasn't used to the attention, wasn't used to people taking her opinions seriously. She had spent so many years simply doing her job without a word, blending into the background, that now, when people actually listened to what she said, it threw her off. It wasn't uncomfortable, exactly, it was just new. One afternoon, as she was organizing a stack of documents, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Patrick. "Can you come to my office when you have a moment? I'd like to talk." Monica felt a sudden flutter in her chest. It wasn't unusual for Patrick to ask for her, but the message felt different this time. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew it would be important. She took a deep breath and walked down the hall to Patrick's office. The door was slightly ajar, and she knocked before entering. Patrick was sitting behind his desk, a cup of coffee in front of him, his gaze focused on a stack of papers. When he saw her, he smiled and gestured for her to sit. "Monica," he began, his voice calm but serious. "I've been thinking a lot about the way things are going. You've been doing exceptional work, and I want to make sure we're moving forward in a way that benefits you as much as it benefits the company." Monica blinked, a little taken aback by his words. "I'm just doing my job, Patrick," she said softly. "I'm here to help." "And you are," he said, leaning forward, his tone sincere. "But I think it's time we talk about your future here." Her heart skipped a beat. She had always kept her expectations low, but the idea of something more, something permanent, was something she hadn't allowed herself to fully consider. "I want to offer you a full-time position," Patrick continued. "Not just the temporary role you've been filling. A position that reflects your potential. You've earned it." Monica's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just a job anymore. It was a real opportunity. She had never thought this day would come, never imagined that someone would see her potential beyond the walls of the service area. She had always believed that the best she could hope for was to be seen as a competent worker, nothing more. But here she was, being offered something bigger, something she had never dared to dream of. "I don't know what to say," Monica finally whispered, her voice filled with awe. "You don't have to say anything right now," Patrick said with a reassuring smile. "Just know that the offer is there. Take your time to think about it. But I believe in you, Monica. I really do." Monica nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this kind of change, but one thing was certain. She wasn't the same person who had walked into this building months ago. She was stronger, more confident, and more capable than she had ever given herself credit for. And for the first time in her life, she could see a future where she wasn't just surviving, but thriving. Monica stood at the edge of the office balcony, looking out at the sprawling city below. The sunlight was soft, casting a golden hue over everything, but it felt distant to her. She had been given the opportunity of a lifetime, yet in this quiet moment, she wasn't sure what to do with it. The offer from Patrick still lingered in her mind. A full-time position, a chance to move beyond the shadows she had lived in for so long. It was everything she had worked for, and yet, for some reason, it felt like it was more than she could handle. She wasn't used to being recognized for her talents. She wasn't used to being seen as someone who could make a difference. But now, that reality was right in front of her, and it was hard to ignore. Her phone buzzed, snapping her back to the present. It was a message from her mother. "How's the new job going, sweetheart? You're making us so proud." Monica smiled to herself. Her mother had always believed in her, even when she had no reason to believe in herself. Even when Monica had doubted her own worth. She had spent so many years hiding, trying to blend into the background, trying to stay unnoticed. But now, the world was different. Everything had changed. As Monica typed a quick response, her mind wandered back to the first day she had walked into this building. She had been nervous, unsure, not knowing what the future would hold. She had been invisible, just another face among so many others. But now, she was someone different. She was someone who had earned the respect of the people around her. She had fought for that respect, and it wasn't something that was given lightly. Monica took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision she had to make. She wasn't sure what the right choice was, but she knew one thing. She had earned the right to choose. As she turned to head back into the office, her heart skipped a beat when she saw Patrick standing in the doorway, watching her. His expression was unreadable, but there was something different about him. He wasn't the same man who had offered her the job just days ago. This was a man who respected her, who saw her as someone worth listening to. He didn't need to say anything. She could see it in his eyes. "Monica," he said, his voice steady but warm. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation the other day, and I want to make sure that you feel you're in control of your future here." Monica nodded, unsure of what to say. She wasn't used to these kinds of conversations. "I'm not asking you to make a decision right now," Patrick continued, "but I want you to know that you have options. Whatever path you choose, you have my full support." Monica swallowed hard. The weight of his words hung in the air between them, and for the first time, she realized just how far she had come. She wasn't the same woman who had walked in here months ago. She wasn't just cleaning the floors anymore. She was making decisions. She was changing her life. "Thank you," Monica said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Patrick smiled, a look of understanding passing between them. "You've earned this, Monica," he said, his words solidifying the truth she had been afraid to admit to herself. She had earned it, and for the first time, she felt like she truly belonged. As Patrick turned to leave, Monica watched him go, her heart filled with a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had come this far, and now, she could see the future ahead of her. A future that was hers to shape, hers to claim. And for the first time in a long time, she believed in herself enough to take that next step. Monica walked through the office building, her steps confident, her head held high. The familiar hum of fluorescent lights and the soft murmur of voices in the hallways no longer felt oppressive. She had taken control of her future, and now it was hers to shape. The uncertainty that had once clouded her thoughts had lifted. Every day felt like a new opportunity, a chance to prove not just to the company, but to herself, that she was more than capable. Patrick's offer had been the turning point. It had been the moment she realized that she didn't have to stay in the shadows, that she could be seen for who she truly was. The role she had accepted wasn't glamorous, but it was her own. She was no longer just an observer in the corporate world. She was a participant. She had earned her place, and that feeling was worth more than any title. As she passed by the conference room, she saw a group of executives gathered around the table, discussing the next big project. Normally, she would have hurried past, not wanting to interrupt or draw attention to herself. But today, she felt a sense of pride. She belonged here now. She had earned the right to stand among them. Patrick looked up from the meeting as Monica passed the door. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, there was a silent understanding between them. He nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement. Monica nodded back, a small but genuine smile playing at the corner of her lips. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough. It was everything. Later that week, Monica was assigned to assist with an important project. It was the kind of work that typically went to the higher-ups, but Patrick had specifically requested her. She wasn't sure why, but it felt like a sign. She wasn't just a bystander in the office anymore. She was contributing in meaningful ways. As she sat in the conference room, reviewing the materials, she noticed a few familiar faces. The other executives, the ones who had once looked through her, were now looking at her with respect. They weren't just seeing a cleaner anymore. They were seeing a colleague. It wasn't just the work that had changed her position in the company. It was the way she carried herself now. She was confident, but not arrogant. She was assertive, but not aggressive. She had found a balance, a way to be heard without needing to shout. The project was a success, and Monica's input was valued more than she had ever expected. She had worked long hours, not out of obligation, but because she was invested in the outcome. She cared about the work, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like her efforts were making a difference. When the project was completed and the results were presented to the board, Monica was there, sitting among the team, not as an outsider, but as an integral part of the group. Patrick stood at the front, presenting the final results, and he briefly glanced in Monica's direction, his smile acknowledging her contribution. It wasn't a grand speech, but it didn't need to be. Monica knew that she had earned this. She had earned her place at the table. As she left the meeting that day, the weight of the moment settled in. She had crossed a line, from being invisible to being seen, from being overlooked to being respected. The journey had been long, and it had been difficult, but it had been worth every step. Monica wasn't just the cleaner anymore. She wasn't just a worker in the background. She was someone who had earned her right to be here. And for the first time, she was proud of that. As the weeks went by, Monica's life continued to unfold in ways she had never expected. The rhythm of her days had settled into something more comfortable, something familiar. She wasn't just working for the paycheck anymore. She was working for herself, for the recognition she had earned. She still did her job with the same level of care and dedication, but now, she was recognized for more than just her ability to keep the office clean. She was recognized for her ideas, her contributions, and her potential. Patrick continued to be a strong presence in her professional life, not as a boss who dismissed her, but as a mentor who guided her when necessary. His respect for her had grown over time, and he had made it clear on several occasions that he valued her input. Monica had never felt like this before. In her past, she had always been afraid of standing out, of speaking up. But now, she did it effortlessly. It wasn't about being loud or forcing her presence into every room. It was about knowing her worth and not being afraid to show it. One day, as she was reviewing a new project proposal, her phone buzzed with a message from Patrick. "Monica, I'd like you to join the board meeting tomorrow. I think it's time you took the next step." Her heart skipped a beat. A board meeting. This was a big deal. She had never imagined being in a room like that, let alone being invited to one. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she knew that if this was the next step, she had to take it. The next day, she stood outside the conference room, her palms slightly sweaty. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. As she entered, she was greeted by familiar faces, some of the executives who had once ignored her now nodding in recognition. Patrick was at the head of the table, his gaze meeting hers with a small smile. "Monica, I'm glad you could join us," he said, motioning for her to sit at the table. She nodded, walking to the seat beside him. The meeting was a blur of numbers, reports, and projections, but as she listened, something inside her clicked. She understood more than she thought. She had been listening, absorbing, learning all this time, and now it was her turn to speak. When the time came for input, she raised her hand, her voice steady but firm. "I think we should consider a different approach," she said, presenting an idea she had been working on in the background. It wasn't something huge, but it was something that could make a difference. The room fell silent for a moment as everyone processed her words. Patrick looked at her, then nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good point, Monica. Let's explore that." The validation was subtle, but it was there. She had spoken up, and her voice had been heard. By the end of the meeting, Monica felt a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't about making a big splash. It was about proving to herself that she had earned the right to be there, to speak up, and to be listened to. As the meeting ended and everyone filed out, Patrick lingered for a moment, watching her. "You did well today," he said. "You've come a long way, Monica. Keep it up." Monica smiled, her heart swelling with pride. This wasn't just about the work. It was about the journey, the path she had carved for herself. She had worked hard to get here, and now, she was a part of something bigger than herself. She wasn't just the cleaner anymore. She wasn't just the invisible woman who worked in the background. She was a leader in her own right. And as she left the conference room, she couldn't help but feel that her future had just begun.